Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the garden question and answer video that I do pretty much every Sunday. You can ask gardening questions down in the comments below the video, and that's where we pick from each week. I've got enough, about half of these are from 2 weeks ago and half of them are from this past week, and we probably have enough to do an extra video at some point here coming up as well. And I've talked about a live Q&A, and as soon as we're in southern Ontario right this minute, and we're staying in Bronte Provincial Park. That's where I'm filming this, and it's not the best internet in the world, so I didn't want to try to do a live Q&A here. I'm going to wait till I get to some place where we have good enough internet to reliable internet that we can do a live Q&A and have you guys ask questions during that. Videos from this past week that went up, one from the second video from North Creek that we shot on some perennials that are like season extending perennials. This is a perfect example of that. The Solidago canadensis that's in front of me right now that's blooming, canadensis, and we are in Canada. There are lots of species of Solidago, but this one is the most common one here. Great looking plant, you know, even before it flowers, and it has such a long flower period. And I've actually been making a joke of this as we've been traveling. If you follow me over on Instagram, I've been kind of shooting photos all over the place of what, you know, the Solidago that comes up in just absolutely crazy places in you know, very popular areas as we're traveling around Niagara Falls and other places. It's just all over the place this time of year. It's kind of hidden in the background, you know, all season, and then boom, September comes and here it is everywhere in the garden or on roadsides and everywhere. What was I saying? Okay, the North Creek video, that was in that video, the Solidago. And then there's a tour, the 16th tour video went up on Thursday as you're watching this on Sunday. And then hopefully Saturday, because I'm shooting this a little earlier in the week, will be the Wildflower farm visit that we made a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now, as we're traveling, and I haven't gotten that video. I just got that video edited, so it should have been up before you're seeing this, or I didn't have good enough internet to do so. Let's see. So let's get to some gardening questions. Oh, and thank you very much for those of you who bought the Learn to Garden video series last month, won the $50 discount. There are continuing discounts below the videos for the weekly garden planner and the Learn to Garden video series, which are over on the website, horttube.com. Gardening questions. Let's see, I'm gonna go back into some of them from the from last week that I didn't answer. So somebody had bought dwarf Burford holly that had red berries on them, but then none have developed since. Do they need a male, female, and how do you know between a male and a female? Well, if you buy a holly and you look up the Latin name for it, if it says Ilex X, okay, whatever it is, so Ilex X dwarf Burford, it's an interspecies hybrid, and they're typically self-pollinating, and so you'll get that with dwarf Burford, Nellie Stevens, lots of them. You can end up, if you only have one plant, you know, even though they're self-fruiting, that may not be the absolute best way. When I typically see dwarf Burford and Nellie Stevens and a lot of the older crosses that are really full of berries, I see them like a bigger row of them, a bigger grouping of them, and it tends to maybe draw in more pollinators to get them pollinated. Again, on the same plant, they have to be pollinated, but one may not be bringing them in, or number two, you've got it in too much shade. It's under some sort of stress. You know, it's not located in the proper space. So there could be a lot of reasons, but I really think that even self-fruiting plants tend to, you know, as examples, blueberries and other things, you can get self-fruiting blueberry varieties. But if you put one in, I just tend to see less fruit than if I put in 3 of them. I think you're drawing in more pollinators, number one, just because you have more flowers available. And then I think they just like to cross between the plants more so. It's not like they're choosing self-fruiting number one. They would rather have another one to do it. There you go. There's that, but it should be self-fruiting. Let's see, if you harvest Echinacea seeds, should they be seeded into the ground now or stored? And then do they need to be cold, any cold stratification? Yes. So You can collect your Echinacea seed, and then after a frost or a freeze in your area, you can actually just go ahead and plant the seed directly in the ground at that point, and then lightly cover it, so hopefully the birds don't take the seed from you. So that leaves, for me, from being a nurseryman for all those years, that leaves too much. That leaves too much room for error, right? For something to go wrong, for them to wash away, for the bed to become weedy before they actually germinate the following spring, and then I can't tell weeds from Echinacea when they're first germinating, or the birds eat them. So what I would rather do is collect them, store them for the winter, and then stratify them in their refrigerator. So you could, put them in the refrigerator for about 30 days. They need about, you'll read different things, but if they're in the ground, if you've seeded them directly in the ground, they probably need 60, 80 days of stratification, something like that. But in the refrigerator, you can speed that up. And they need about 30 days, which is less than other things, but it still requires some stratification. This means it needs to spend some time cold, basically, not frozen, but cold, in order to, it's nature's way of plants not being tricked, right? It doesn't want to germinate unless it's already been cold through the winter. So if you get like a false spring in the middle of winter, it won't germinate. The plants won't leaf out. Things don't start growing. They have to stay dormant for a certain period of time. So basically we're coming back around and tricking them into germinating. So I'd rather store them, put them in the refrigerator for 30 days and germinate them in the house and then put them in the garden. That way I know I'm going to get exactly what I'm after, which is new Echinacea in the garden. Another thing here at Bronte Provisional Park that's beautiful right now is the Staghorn sumac. But you can see the fall color is a little premature. It's a little dry up here. There's been, we've noticed as we've traveled further north that it's been dry in this area as well, which is this really beautiful red on them this time of year. And then of course, as the next few weeks, it'll develop more and more of the red in the leaves as well. Most of these stands of sumac in here are probably between 6 and 8 feet tall. Something like that. Very healthy, very vigorous, native. We don't get much of this in our area, but from about our area north, more and more and more, and up here in southern Ontario, just tons of this Staghorn sumac. And it's, of course, again, I'm gonna get the I'm gonna get the Solidago in almost every shot right this second. But we're gonna bounce around as we go. I meant to say that right at the beginning. We're gonna bounce around in the park here and show you some of the things that are blooming right here at the late summer and early fall, because I definitely want to make this more and more of an emphasis of the channel, is that we're watching birds in here eating some berries on a couple things that we'll show you, and watching pollinators take advantage of these late season things. Somebody purchased a beautyberry. It's just an 18-inch stalk. It flowered and berried. Of course, if you get any new growth on a beautyberry, you're gonna get berries and you're gonna get flowers and then berries as that growth happens during the summer. Should they cut the single stalk down in the late winter to encourage more stalks, or will more emerge if it's not cut back? Definitely more are going to emerge on it, but I think you're gonna wanna slow down that main stalk no matter what. So I'd probably I wouldn't cut it all the way down, but any cutting you do on it will encourage some other suckering to occur down at the base of it, or branching for sure. But maybe cut it in half. I don't want to tell somebody to cut something all the way to the ground and then nothing happen, but just cut it in half in the late winter while it's dormant, and you'll have no problem getting those to become shrubbier in the future. But when we root something, sometimes if we don't cut that terminal growth at the top on the rooted cutting, that piece just continues to go. I really like to take a piece on something like that and actually cut that top, when I was actually rooting it, and that would have already produced kind of a multi-trunked shrub immediately. But if I just take the terminal growth on something like this, sometimes that growth will just continue on that one piece rather than branching. We'll start with this up close of these seeds on this Jack in the Pulpit. Here we are, usually by midsummer, so they've kind of died back to the ground completely. but you can still see this cluster of seeds, quite beautiful when you're walking by and see this, and you know that this was a jack-in-the-pulpit earlier in the season. They're actually pollinated by like gnats and flies and interesting things. There was a question last week about the Stellar Ruby magnolia, and since it's fragrant in the evening, is it the moths and bats and things potentially pollinate them? I actually don't know. Magnolias, there's some interesting magnolias that actually capture bees in them. They have the bees land in them, and then they close the flower up on them, and they trap them in there for some period of time and then open. So they have different strategies, each of them probably depending on where they evolved, but we think, again, definitely want to expand our thoughts on what a pollinator can be, because it can be a hummingbird or a bat or a gnat, which is, I got a lot of gnats around me right this second. It can be all kinds of things, pollinating plants out there in the world, and they're all definitely important. One other plant that I'll point out before I do the next question. This is Elaeagnus umbellata. We have 3 different species of invasive Elaeagnus in our area in Raleigh, but umbellata seems to be the most cold tolerant because it's up here in southern Ontario. It's got a little red fruit on it. This one doesn't have any. I wish I would have stopped at one that did have the red fruit on them right now, but you can see this thing's capable of making a tremendous amount of seed. And when I see umbellata again, they're invasive for sure, but when I see it growing, typically it's not like colonizing a big giant space. It's one plant here and one plant there. Elaeagnus pungens, on the other hand, when we see it invading a spot, it can just absolutely take an entire half acre. And it has this like 2-part ability to climb and also be shrubby. So we've seen it like basically climb up through trees, supporting itself to get light so that it can feed itself down in the understory of the trees. But again, invasive, probably the birds are taking the fruit off of it. It's probably made itself, right at home here, with the native birds and that kind of thing. But it's interesting to see it all the way up here in southern Ontario, because this is one that's in my neighborhood in Raleigh, in the wooded spaces as well. Next, let's see. Next question. Somebody wants to know our wood chip process in the garden. This is a pretty complex one, and this is the type of thing in the Learn to Garden video series that I went through, was the soil building with the wood chips. And I got another wood chip question coming up a little bit later as well. This is, like I said, I should rename the channel Wood Chips with Jim Putnam, because I get so many wood chips, or red buds with Jim Putnam, or Laura Petalum with Jim Putnam. There's a lot of things that are recurring themes on the channel for sure. The process for us was just, we cut our grass down to almost nothing, and then we buried it in wood chips. We actually had the benefit of putting down a little bit of compost from Soil Cube first, and then put the wood chips on top, and then we let them break down. They're going to break down at different rates depending on where you are. If you're in a dry climate in the Southwest, it's going to take a while for you to have enough moisture probably in it for it to break down. If you're in the Southeast, it's probably going to break down a little quicker. Just a lot of that's going to depend on where you are. So to say, I put down wood chips and then I started planting 6 months later, that was me. And what I can do in Raleigh, it's going to break, it just, once the engine gets started, the beneficial microbes start breaking it down really quickly, because we have the humidity, we have regular rainfall. It doesn't go through periods of drought and, ups and downs and valleys. So this part of it's going to depend on where you live as to where you're going to be in 6 months or 12 months, in terms of planting. But once you've gotten to the point where, 80% of the chunkiness is kind of gone from it, it's time to plant in it. And it's really a very effective technique for rebuilding soil quickly. I would point out that in here, obviously none of these plants in this forest are being fertilized, right? And they're all growing well. what's happening here is that we're having chunky material from all this stuff fall off. We're having limbs and sticks and, you know, leaves and chunkier material fall onto the forest floor. Below that layer of chunkiness is the things that fell like last year that are now broken down a little bit into kind of a humus layer. And then below that, the native soil, which may be rocky or clay or sand or whatever it is that's down there. That's all we're trying to do with the wood chip process, is recreate the forest floor. Basically, a developer came in and stripped all of this that had happened all of the decades of falling trees and pine cones and sticks and limbs and dead animals and everything else that ever hit the forest floor that was building soil. They took it and just stripped it off. And so the wood chips are allowing us just to rebuild that, restart it, and basically jump ahead a little bit of what just regular mulching would do, because that takes 20 years probably to build an inch or two of of compost, whereas the wood chip, the deep wood chip method, just jumps that way ahead. Lots of Queen Anne's lace blooming throughout Bronte Provisional Park and everywhere up and down the roads in the that we've been seeing in our travels, and it becomes this really interesting seed head here that it's almost as attractive as the flower cluster was, and it kind of leads me into, you know, we of course collect these seeds once they dry out to, you know, this, you know, the seed is collectible, you know, once they're fully dried out on the plant. And that'll lead me to the next question, which is, could you do a video on our seed starting process? We have lots of seed starting videos, and remember, everything on this channel, if you go to my main page on YouTube, the HortTube with Jim Putnam, just the main page, there's a little bar at the top that says playlist and other things that are on there, reels and other things. That playlist button's important because I do have the videos divided into playlists, and when I start to move the videos from the Garden Plants with Jim Putnam channel over, we'll have all those playlists from that. But if you want shade plants, there's a playlist for it. There's the new house has all the videos that have been shot at the last 4 years of that project. Everything's divided into different things, and seed starting is one of those things. And going back to how I built my seed starting rack and all the seed starting that we've ever done, hours and hours and hours of content on seed starting, and we'll do that next year as well. I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about that. Next question before we move on here. Do better boxwoods do better in shade or part sun? You know, boxwoods are actually native understory plants. And so whether we're talking about American boxwoods or Japanese boxwoods or English boxwoods, doesn't really matter. They're all good understory plants, and I think undervalued for that. We tend to just value them for full sun foundation plantings and containers and interesting shapes that we can do with them and that kind of thing in the sun, but they're great understory plants in the shade, so don't discount that at all, whether it's, you know, better boxwoods or whatever boxwoods that you're buying. Variegated ones will probably not, you know, be quite as variegated if you put them in too deep a shade, but the others, really great shade plants. Tons of purple loosestrife or lithrum this entire trip. Basically, this is, you know, just Eurasian native that was brought here a long time ago, and it is well established. Pollinators love it. It's a native at this point. There's nothing we could ever do to get rid of this plant. I don't want to, you know, I know people don't like to hear that, but it would take the 340 million Americans pulling this constantly to get rid of it, and we still wouldn't get rid of it. It's everywhere, but there is less of it up here in southern Ontario, I'm noticing. You know, this is the spot where it's starting to thin out. We're a little harder to find it. New York was just in every field you passed. But this combination, though, with the goldenrod, the yellow and the purple together, is quite striking. Somebody wanted to know about planting a blue spruce in zone 8A in Tennessee. Should they do it in the fall or the spring? Fall is fine. You're talking about a zone 3 hardy plant, so you're not going to have any problem fall planting that. And someone asked if we'd ever grown pentas from seed. We don't. We typically buy our pentas down at Big Bloomers because they normally have them in like 4 or 6 packs, and so the deal's pretty good. But they're not hard to grow from seed. So if you want to do your pentas from seed, it's not a problem. some of the newer varieties sometimes aren't always available from seed, and some of the newer varieties of pentas are really, really good. So, you know, but they're definitely worth trying. And again, we have a seed starting playlist on the channel if you want to learn about starting your own seed. The chicory really has a beautiful flower on it this time of year. Another European plant brought here a long time ago. But beautiful flowers. We typically will just see this here and there. You know, just spotty, never big, big clusters. This common buckthorn, on the other hand, this is another European plant that was brought here, 150 years ago or more. This one is definitely problematic. The berries on it are probably beneficial. I mean, probably good for imagine the birds are what's spreading this thing around pretty quickly, so they're taking advantage of it. But it's a very big time invasive in this part of the world, in southern Ontario, the Niagara Falls area, upper New York area, and other areas as well. Let's see. I was talking about the bihu in one of the tour videos. The bihu Japanese maple at the house. I've got a holly planted directly behind it, because I want something green behind that. The winter bark on that bihu Japanese maple is like is a yellowish orange color. It's really, really bright and vivid. And so in the winter time, if I don't have a backdrop behind it, you're just kind of gonna look right through it and not really pick up on it. The one at the Ralston is backed by a big screen of hollies, very, very large evergreen holly screen right behind it. And so in the winter time, that yellow is just sitting, that yellow orangey color is just sitting right in front of that green, and it just pops. They just wanted to know some other plants, literally anything that's evergreen. Evergreen's important in this particular case, because the time of year we're talking about, when the bihu is really showing, that Japanese maple is really showing off, is the winter bark. And so any evergreen that gets larger than it, so it needs to be something that'll get 15 or 20 feet tall in order to put that wall behind it that will allow it to show off. But anything. Somebody has an Elysium they bought for a north-facing foundation. They want to know when to, should they plant it now or in the spring in zone 8A? Definitely now. There's another zone 6 hardy plant. Some Elysium is and some isn't. So to check with that, but some of them are 6B hardy. So if you're in zone 8A, any kind of woody shrub, I'm going to plant it for sure in the fall period of time rather than waiting till spring, because when it's above the ground in the container, it's going to be much more vulnerable to freezing solid and actually causing damage than it is in the ground. In zone 8A, the ground's going to rarely ever freeze at all, so it's going to be much more protected in the ground rather than the container. We'll show a native cornus here. This is the gray dogwood. These are native in the northeastern United States, southeastern Canada. Of course, we're end of season and there's a ton of leaf spot on this, and it's about to lose its leaves anyway, but these are incredibly beneficial to the birds. We've seen lots of birds. What was the one bird you said was on?
Black-cap chickadee.
What's that?
Black-cap chickadee.
Black-cap chickadee. Steph is great with the birds. We're out here with the plants, and she'll see a bird, and sometimes it's amazing to me how many birds she actually knows, because it is one of her favorite things is observing birds, and us going to places where we can observe birds. Somebody said, would you ever do multi-season videos at Biltmore? Is it difficult to arrange to film at gardens because of restrictions? There is restrictions at a lot of the gardens for filming for profit in any way. So we don't ever go into any garden and just start filming. No matter what, even if there are no restrictions, I really rarely ever, I don't think we've ever done that. I'm lucky enough to have been in this business for now 40 years coming up this spring. I think it'll be 40 years that I've been in horticulture in some way or another, 39 or 40. And I've met a lot of people in all those years, very, very fortunate for that to have happened. And a lot of times I just, I knew that Mark Wethington had worked at the Norfolk Botanic Garden, and so I knew we were going to Norfolk, and so I just texted him, and he put us in contact with Les Parks. And if you haven't seen that video with Les in the rain, we were in a tropical storm filming a video at the Norfolk Botanic Garden. If you haven't watched that video, I love that Botanic Garden. But that's the way in which we get into gardens. So Biltmore would be that same way. If we were going to do it or approach them in some way, I would, either hit them with an email or find somebody that knew somebody there. And that's the process that we use. And then hopefully they see of some benefit to us coming and filming in the garden that promotes the garden in some way. And it's beneficial to both parties involved, but I don't want that to ever be a one-way street where I'm getting content out of it without asking permission first before we're doing that. And we're making new friends. I mean, every one of these places we get to go, if we didn't know the person beforehand, usually we have a new friend as we're leaving the garden. And typically that makes another contact, because a lot of times they go, oh, if you haven't seen this garden, you have to go to it. You have to see this garden. And when I contacted Mark, that's when Mark told me other things in the Norfolk area. This wild teasel, this is another European native, has the thorniest stems on it. And these brushes on the top after the flowers have finished, I don't know if you can hear that or not. It's really, really wild and these little seeds pop out when this happens. But the dogs have picked up a couple of these since we've been in this park, and then they walk around with them spreading the seed. This thing will actually attach to an animal and break off, but it's super, super thorny. And again, another Eurasian native that was brought here and everywhere. Apparently this one's in New Zealand and all over the planet at this point. Again, this is a great example, like Steph just said, of talking about that bihu maple in front of something green, because you see this, how striking this is. Part of that is because that white pine is directly behind it. Back there, and so that it's contrasting off of it. It's good about creating contrast between one thing and another. We have a lot of that in the garden, and that part 16 of the video tour of the garden tour this week I spent a lot of time talking about that, because the area of the garden that area of the garden is got a lot of contrasty colors in it. Let's see. Somebody asked if Hicks yew would be a good topiary. And I kind of don't think so, because it's the very fastigiate one. And what's going to happen, I think you'll be able to topiary it, but it's constantly going to have these vertical spikes coming on it that may look a little odd. I think you'd be better off with more of a spreading yew. Okay, and then as you topiary it up, you can create a more of a weeping habit or a round ball habit a little easier than you would with Hicks. The answer to your question is yes, it can be topiaried. I don't think that it's really fastigiate plants that grow very vertical like that are great candidates for it, because you're going to be pruning it a lot to keep it in the shape, the top of it, the way you want to keep it. Who selects the perennial plant of the year? Because that was in the video at North Creek this week, that a mountain mint species is the perennial plant of the year. Normally it's some sort of highly manipulated perennial in the past that is very floriferous and compact and tame in the garden and easy for gardeners to work with. But this year the Perennial Plants Association went with something that was just a straight species native plant, probably one of the best plants in the world for pollinators, not the most floriferous thing for us. It's kind of interesting change up. I mean, a really stark change up. And you can go back and look at all the perennial plants of the year, but it's the Perennial Plant Association decides it. They met in Charlotte this year, and it's the funniest thing this year. We had the IPPS meeting, the International Plant Propagator Society meeting, was in Raleigh this year, and I missed it. It was in Raleigh, of all places, and I missed it. And then the Perennial Plant Association meeting was in Charlotte, and I didn't go to that either. Two big meetings were in my own state this year, but we were doing other things at the time that these two meetings happened. So it's really kind of funny that I could have taken advantage of the two bigger horticulture meetings that were in my own state and would have been easy to get to, and I did not go to either one of them. There's common milkweed everywhere out here, and if you put, just we see it coming up in the cracks, you know, and we're over in Toronto yesterday, and you see it coming up in the cracks in the sidewalk, in the unmowed grass. You know, once you have common milkweed, you're definitely going to have lots and lots of common milkweed. Let's see, let's do one more in this location. Somebody just asked, how does touch of gold holly compared to sunshine ligustrum? Sunshine ligustrum is going to get big, and the touch of gold holly is more of a mounding, small growing holly. The entire plant on sunshine ligustrum is gold. Every leaf is gold, from the middle of the plant all the way out to the outside of the plant. Touch of gold has a touch of gold on the outside of it. So the interior of the plant's kind of green, and the outside in the sunlight is kind of yellow. But they both have a place. One is going to be more for, you know, if you're looking for a small meatball shaped plant that's low maintenance, that can kind of have that gold color, but really kind of live in the background through the summer while your perennials and other things are blooming, and then come the star of the winter garden. You know, that's a good use for it. Sunshine ligustrum can be used as a screen, or it could be used in any shape or size you want to kind of keep it. But they're very different growth habits, and one is all yellow and one is part yellow. We've moved over to Darlington Provisional Park, which is a little east of Toronto, and this plant will be very familiar to lots of people. It's throughout the Northeast and up into Canada here. This is an orange jewelweed. It's an Impatiens capensis. There are like 1,000 species of Impatiens, so this is a big. There are a lot of species in this genus. This orange flower, super showy. These are a little tall because they're in some shade. Same thing with the goldenrod that's out there behind it. Normally what we'll see in sunnier areas is this plant will only be about 2 to 3 feet in height, but it does take a lot of space. This is one of those natives that's definitely extremely happy wherever it is. And in fact, looks to me like they had mowed this down earlier in the season. There's wheat straw down here in the ditch. I think they had seeded this, and then there's so many seed here that this just came roaring right back in that same space. Again, it's stretching a bit for the light, but it was a good place to kind of film it over here. But I love these really super complex flowers that we get on Impatiens that hang down, and just a lot going on in that very interesting flower. Okay, I think 6 more questions we'll do here at Darlington, and again, ask gardening questions down below in the comment section, and we pick from those each week. Somebody wanted to know, do we shred our leaves first? Because I know we leave the leaves in our garden. Do we actually shred them, or do we just leave them whole? I'll leave that up to you. Some of that depends on the size of the leaves and how thick they are, probably. If you just had small maple leaves and just had a thin veneer of them, I'd probably just leave those whole. If you've got a bit large leaves that won't break down very easily, or just giant piles of leaves, it might be best to bring them out to the driveway, run the mower over them a few times, and then redistribute them in the garden, or suck them up in something that shreds them and throws them right back on the ground. They make machines like that, or any kind of leaf shredder that you can use. The more edges you put on those leaves, the more kind of jaggedy, ragged edges that are on the leaves, the faster they're going to break down and start to feed your plants the next season. I will say that a lot of our, if you're going to shred them and you have a big pollinator garden, don't shred them all. There are a lot of things that overwinter on these leaves that drop down to the ground, and so some of our beneficials, probably some non-beneficial things, are going to be on the back sides of those leaves. So definitely understand, if you got this much leaf pressure in your garden, you're going to take some of those out. You're going to use them in some other way or shred them or whatever. But maybe it's best for our oak, drops all the leaves in the back. We don't shred them. We just kind of redistribute them a little thinner around the garden. And that way, hopefully, we're allowing some of the things that are overwintering on those oak leaves to survive the winter. A lot of words in that answer. Several different ways to think about that, though. Somebody asked if mulching containers helps. The one thing with containers is we tend to overwater things more than underwater. Somebody's probably going to laugh out loud that I just said that, because they forget to water their containers all the time. But we do tend to overdo, especially early on when things go in containers, or especially as they're slowing down in the fall. It's easy to overwater. It's always easy to overwater, late fall, or as the days are getting shorter and the sun's on a little bit of a lower angle, to start to overwater containers as well. So we have to be careful. Mulching is going to increase that moisture content in that container, or that, you know, it's not going to evaporate out of there as quickly, for sure. So it's really about what you mulch with. You'll see on container plants you're buying now, they'll have rice hulls or walnut hulls or pecan hulls that they're using on top of it to do some weed prevention in the container. But those things breathe pretty well. They're chunkier materials that breathe pretty well. If we used hardwood mulch in there, it's going to put a cap down on top, which will help some with any weeds you have coming up in there, but I think it may end up keeping things over wet. So, you know, I'm just cautious with that. I'd rather take a handful of compost and use that as my cap on the containers. Weed seed-free compost, for sure. But that would be the best way, I think, to put a little cap on your container without keeping it too wet. Here's another introduced and very common flowering plant we see in this area quite a bit. This is bird vetch, is the common name for it. It's in the pea family. Sometimes the pea family members can be, either you can, you know, take a look at the flower, which typically has a keel down at the bottom. If you look at things like wisteria or red buds, you can see, or peas or beans, you can see the flower has a keel on it. It's very unique. Then there's also another way, is this kind of opposite pinnate foliage that we see. Foliage on a lot of these pea family members can be a giveaway as well. And you just think about wisteria with a slightly larger, much larger version of this, but that can be a giveaway as well. We can just ride along and go, that's in the Fabaceae for sure, without even seeing this flower. This flower is kind of small to be able to pick up on, you know, the actual shape of the actual shape of the individual flowers. But another common one, European or Asian introduced plant, and good at producing seed. That's all of these pea family members make great seed. And of course, we all love beans and know how many beans one little bean can make, right? when we're growing different types of peas and beans. Next question, somebody asked about the dogs in the RV. So what are they doing? While we're taking a hike, at last week's Q&A, we were hiking up through that canyon. What's going on with the dogs while that's happening, while we're traveling? We have a Class B van that we travel in, and it can actually run the air conditioning without being plugged in. It actually has a backup plan to that, to alert us and to turn on the motor if it runs down. We have a backup to a backup to a backup. We get back from one of those hikes. So a lot of times they go with us. Like yesterday, this path that we're on right now, the dogs walked this path in the evening last night with us, and they'll go on a lot of things. We just didn't know at that other park whether or not they could have done it or not. Griffin could definitely have done it. Holly probably couldn't have done that one, but she's perfectly capable of doing this one. So a lot of times, the vast majority of the time they're with us. But then we went into Toronto the other day and we were in a park and we were plugged in with the RV, and we get back and we're hot and sweaty. 30,000 steps we did in Toronto, plus a 10-mile bike ride. Round trip was 10 miles on the bikes to start our journey. And we get back and they're in the air conditioning asleep. and then we exercise them. So they're very comfortable along the trail. We are up here. Some of the reason that I wanted to come to the Northeast this year and travel and do some of the video content we've done has been so Holly could be in cooler air. And so this morning, it's 11 o'clock as we're filming this right now, 11:30 a.m. And she has been outside since 6 this morning and just absolutely loving it. Had to put her back in to ride over here to shoot this video. Back over there, she'll be out again. This is her perfect weather we found for this part husky that's almost 16 years old. So they're having a blast on the trip, and if they're not with us, they're in ice box basically, because I got to keep Holly pretty cool. Anything above about 74 now, and she's panting. So, you know, that's where we are. She'll be 16 in 3 months now. Here's the aromatic asters that were in the North Creek video from earlier in the week, not blooming down in Philadelphia a few weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago now. We've made our way over to the other side, into Canada, and they're still, now they're opening up here. Imagine even down there, they may be showing a little bit of color at this point. Somebody said, we got a plane just keeps circling above us. I don't know if you can hear it. I doubt, you may not be able to hear it, but it's pretty loud up there. Let's see. Somebody has been adding wood chips to their garden to the point where it's become hydrophobic. This is pretty easy to do, okay? What can happen if you over mulch in time? You can create almost a dry socket in the mulch. Even after it rains, it'll seem like the top of the mulch is a little moist, but you can dig down in it and find kind of a dry area in the middle of it. And at that point, the wood chips, the hardwood mulch, the pine straw, it doesn't matter what you're using for mulch, is no longer really working for you anymore. Once you get it too thick like that. That 5-part landscape job that we did, was that last year or the year before, Steph? I don't know, maybe the year before, maybe 2 years ago now. That place had been mulched and mulched and mulched and mulched. Like, the guy's gonna get paid twice a year, and he's dumping 4 inches of mulch on it every time, and he's gonna get paid for it. And he did it to the point where it was this thick. And we were, out there digging in it, and it's just really super dry material down in it. And what we did was we just had to bite the bullet a little bit, and we pulled that stuff back, we planted, and then we let it break down, and we ended up kind of weedy over there a little bit while we waited for some more of that stuff to break down before we remulched it. We just reached a tipping point where it wasn't breaking down readily. So what we want to do with our mulch is put a thin enough layer down each time that it's almost done, but it's still pretty effective before we put another layer on top of it. It's really you gotta be careful with that. You don't want to end up with 6 inches of mulch down, and what will happen, this wood chip thing, they've just done it over and over and over again. So we can do that deep wood chip thing because they're so chunky. But imagine if I did the deep wood chips and they broke down, but they didn't quite finish breaking down. Then I did the deep wood chips on top of that, and it broke down, but almost broke down. Eventually you're gonna get it so deep that there's just no air, no water can penetrate it. It just starts running off the top of it. It doesn't happen for everybody, but it will happen for some. And if you're in a particularly wet area like Florida or something like that, it can really then make bad bacteria and bad guys in the soil rather than good guys in the soil. So I become anaerobic in time. So there's a definitely balancing act in ornamental landscaping. Just letting it break down. Don't let it break down so much that you're getting crazy amounts of weed pressure, but let it break down enough that next layer doesn't prevent air to getting down to that wood that's down there lower and preventing it from breaking down properly. I said there were 1,000 species of impatiens. Here in the first one we showed that was a native. This one is a non-native. This is Himalayan balsam is what this one's called. You see it has white and pink flowers, and you can kind of tell by that foliage on this one that it's an impatient. It also has that low-hanging flower, but you can also tell a little bit on this. Some of our ornamental annual impatiens that we use in the garden have similar foliage to this one. Highly floriferous, I'm sure great at making seed, like most impatiens. I see a bee. There's a native bee in one right down below where Steph is filming right now. He's going all the way in there. You can see him backing out. So native bee is definitely taking advantage of this Himalayan native impatient here and right up on the shore of Lake Ontario, which is kind of fun. We are right on Lake Ontario here, and this park is next to Darlington Provincial Park, and I don't know if it's got a different name. It's got all these trails through here we walked the dogs on yesterday, grassy mowed trails, but in a big giant meadow. They've turned what looks like whatever disturbed space this was in the past has been converted back to a meadow. I don't want to say a native meadow because there's lots of non-native things in here, but they've nobody's going to come in here and get rid of these. We also have this prickly cucumber. Very pretty flowers on this, and it climbs. And some of our cucumber plants in this plant family, the cucurbits, are really good at making seed. And we talked about this last year. We had a Mexican cucumber at the house that just seeded itself everywhere. This one has its seeds hidden in a spiny little cucumber right there. You can see why they call this a prickly cucumber, right? This is a native to North America. So it's got, it was here before the before the impatient it was climbing on right here and taking advantage of. But you can see that we see these flowers pretty frequently in our travels here. We're going to 2 more provincial parks before this is over with, so we'll show you some more of the things that are in flower, because we've skipped several things so we could spread them out over a couple of the Q&A videos. Forgot my question, stay right there. Last question for this week, and again, ask questions down in the comment section below the video. There are t-shirts and other things on our website, horttube.com, if you're interested in going over there and shopping with us. Let's see. Somebody said from last week's video that it was interesting that we all have these very highly amended soils in our gardens, but that all of those trees and everything were just growing in rock in that wooded space along the edge of that gorge in the middle of New York there. And they were doing just fine. But keep in mind, all that stuff's being allowed to drop onto the ground. It's self-mulching itself. Those rocks have a lot of the things that those plants need. A lot of the nutrients that those plants need are locked in that rock and in the dirt that's holding those rocks together. So a lot of what those plants need, plus the fact that the organic material that they're dropping on their, when they shed their leaves in the fall or shed their needles during the season or shed whatever, all that stuff's staying on the ground. So it is, in fact, similar to our ornamental gardens in a way. I know it's more rocky and nobody would want to probably be in there digging, and the plants are able to figure out ways to go between the rocks and do their thing. And they're also breaking the rocks apart, and they're making nutrients available in time by breaking those rocks apart and releasing the salts and other things that are in those rocks that end up in the water out there, that get carried down to the sea and salinate the sea. All of those things are working together, but this meadow, when it dies back to the ground, everything is going to basically turn into humus over the winter and the next spring, and all these things are going to come back up right through the middle of it. It's very similar to our ornamental gardens. Our ornamental gardens are just neater. It's a neater version of this because most of the time we're keeping them cleaner. We're not allowing all this grassy weed material to come up in the middle of them. We're mulching in between that, but it's not that dissimilar. Okay, and what we're really doing what I'm trying to teach about our ornamental gardens is to come back and duplicate what's actually happening in our wild lands, which is these plants are protecting the soil. They're growing really close together. They're dying back to the ground or losing their leaves or losing their needles and feeding themselves in a cycle, plus the rock dust that's down there below them. And that cycle, plus the rain, plus the sun, is all they need. And that's what we do, hopefully do in our ornamental gardens, and stop thinking less about having full control all the time of every little detail. So thank you guys so much for following along and watching, and we'll have another one of these Q&As next week. 2 more provincial parks to go.